So, just so you know, it's not like about me, but I'm speaking in first.
What troop do you represent?
516.
Okay.
Okay.
I forgot to do that.
You what? The troop will come up?
Yes, troop 646.
Wait, hold on.
I'm going to be doing the Polar Express.
You
Yes!
should perform it.
No. I'm going to be telling the Polar Express, and it is a big childhood favorite. One Christmas Eve, many, many years ago, I lay quietly in my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I did not make a sound. I was listening for a sound, but not just any sound. The ringing bells of Santa's sleigh. There is no such thing as Santa, my friends would tell me, but I knew that they were wrong. And on that very night, I did hear a sound, but not of ringing bells, but of hissing steam and squeaking metal. I looked outside my window, and I saw a train standing perfectly in front of my house. Out of one of the cars stepped a conductor, who pulled a huge pocket watch out of his vest, glanced at it, and motioned for me to come down. So I tiptoed down the stairs and grabbed my robe and slippers, and I headed out. As I walked towards him, he looked at me, and he yelled, "Ahoy!"
Lord!
I walked over to him curiously, and I said, "Where are we going?" And he goes, "Well, where are we going?" And he said, "The North Pole, of course." "Well, how are we going to get there?" "The Polar Express," he said, and grabbed my hand. I jumped onto the train, and I looked around to see hundreds of children in their nightgowns and robes, drinking hot chocolate and eating all kinds of delicacies. I took a seat, and I looked out the window and watched my house fly by. The Polar Express raced through the streets and through hills and valleys and glaciers and everything in between. We went through dark forests with wolves and bunny rabbits, and we went up mountains so high as if we could scrape the moon. But the Polar Express continued to race on. At one point, everyone on the train saw lights in the distance, and the conductor raised his hand and pointed out the window and said, "There, kids, is the North Pole." The North Pole was a huge city on the top of the world, filled with gleaming lights and big factories and elves galore. As we continued to race through the streets, the elves began to gather at the center of the city. "What are they gathering for?" one of the little girls asked. "Well," said the conductor, "Santa will be giving the first gift of Christmas." And they said, "Who's he going to give to? Who's he going to give it to?" they all asked. And he said, "Well, Santa must choose one of you." We all sighed. The train began to slow down and eventually came to a halt, and we all jumped off. We began pushing and shoving through the elves, trying to get to the center to see what was there. And lo and behold stood the infamous Santa Claus, in his big red suit with his reindeers by his side, dancing and prancing and ringing their bells. It was the most magical sound I had ever heard, and I wanted to hear more of it. Santa glanced over the crowd at the children, and he looked straight at me, and he said, "You, little boy, come with me." So he sat down next to Santa, and he sat down next to Santa and said, "Now, little boy, what would you like for Christmas?" "Well," the little boy said, I know I could have anything in the entire world, but the one thing that I want for Christmas is not inside Santa's bag, but it is one silver bell from Santa's sleigh." So that Santa smiled, and he asked an elf to cut the bell. He threw it up to Santa, he looked at the little boy and then at the crowd, and raised it high in the air and said, "The first gift of Christmas." And there it was. He placed it in the little boy's hand, who placed it in his pocket, and jumped off the sleigh. He went back to the train with all the other little children, and they were ready for their journey home. As soon as he sat down in his seat, all the kids started poking and nudging him, begging him to see the bell. He finally reached back into his pocket, but only to find a hole, and he could not believe it. "I lost the bell, I lost the bell, I can't believe it, what am I going to do? It was the only thing I would ever get from Santa." And one little girl said, well, why don't we go outside and check the grounds to see if the bell would be there? And he said, okay, great idea. So they all started to get up off their seats, but the train lurched forward and they were on their way. I was devastated to lose the bell, but I mean, it was the only thing I would ever get from Santa. It was the only chance I had, and I couldn't believe it. But I had to say goodbye to all the children and all the little toddlers on the bus, and even the conductor. So when we got back to my house, I waved goodbye to everyone and said I would hope to see them next year if the train came back. And the conductor cupped his hands around his mouth and said, "Merry Christmas!" And I waved goodbye. The next Christmas morning, my little sister Sarah and I were opening up all of our presents. After it seemed as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last little box sitting behind the tree with my name on it. So I opened the box, and inside was the silver bell. I could not believe it. I didn't know how this would happen until behind the bell I saw a little letter from Santa Claus that said, "Fix that hole in your pocket, little boy, and remember, always have a Merry Christmas." I was so ecstatic that I began to ring the bell, and my sister and I listened to its beautiful sound. But my parents looked over, and my mom said, "Oh, well, that's too bad." My father agreed, "Yes, it's broken." My parents had not heard a sound. Over the years, I realized that all my friends could hear the bell at one point, but as the years went by, it fell silent for all of them. Even my little sister Sarah found 1 year where she could never hear its sweet sound. And although I've grown old, I still have the bell, and I've realized that it doesn't ring for everyone, but only those who truly believe.